Hello students, by now we have done the first two sections of the wasteland. The first section, the burial of the dead, is the introductory section of the poem. The second one, a game of chess. There we saw the portraiture of two types of women. The rich aristocratic lady Belladonna, who is bored with her urban wastelandish existence and is in a neurotic state. The second, Lil, the lower middle class woman. She exists at the lower level of this barren expanse. She is helpless, though desperate, but she is unable to revert her situation. So here in this second section we see that the theme of violation of sex, innocence and moral values has been foregrounded by Eliot. The main theme, the relationship of love, sex and marriage between men and women, has been handled very well here in this section. Love fails to achieve its high ideals and its elevated, profound and spiritual meanings, according to Eliot, because in this modern wasteland, man lacks the capacity for experiencing spiritual love, and that's why he fails even at the physical level. So after this second section, we come to the third one, the fire sermon. The third section, the fire sermon. The title of this section has been derived from Lord Buddha's fire sermon, where he calls upon his disciples and seekers after God to give up desire, that is the root of all evils. Man is shown burning in the fire of lust, anger, malice, hatred and other kinds of evil passions. These fires must be overcome. The spirit of the Buddha's sermon, with its ideas of resignation and self-abnegation, is linked with the ideas of St. Augustine and his unholy passions. Eliot here attempts to bring together the two voices of Eastern and Western asceticism in order to encompass a wide range of humanity. So from the closed drawing room and pub of the last section, where we heard the tales of nervous tension and bawdy talks of naked sexiness, we now here pace with Tiresias and come down to the bank of the river Thames, the scene of outdoor flirtation and cheap sexual games outside marriage. It is a world of automatic lust, as Hugh Kenner calls it, where men and women are burning in the fire of passions. To Elizabeth Drew, it is not the fire of lust at all which is illustrated, but merely the complete indifference towards chastity. The opening lines, the river's tent is broken, the last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank, the wind crosses the brown land unheard, the nymphs are departed, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. So the description of the river scene in the opening lines, it evokes a sense of the loss of purity and chastity of the river. Winter has arrived, the branches of the trees standing on the bank of the river are leafless, so the river's tent is broken. The trees are rendered leafless. So looking at the desolate condition of the bank, Tiresias' mind flits to Edmund Spenser's Prothalamion, in which the nymphs strew the river with flowers to honor the marriage of the two noble ladies, Elizabeth and Catherine Somerset, the two daughters of the Earl of Worcester, in 1596. Spenser stresses the beauty of sweet Thames, the purity of the river's water and the flowers on its bank, which decorate the auspicious occasion of the wedding of, or the twin wedding of the two sisters. But in the 20th century England and in Eliot's world, the Thames river has been contaminated by orgies of lust by the holidaying crowd of merrymakers. So now the river is visited in summer by society girls along with their customers, the moneyed commercial bosses who leave behind them empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights, all these objective correlatives. The nymphs are departed, and their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, departed, have left no addresses. So, as it is winter now, their society girls, along with their customers, had visited the river banks during the summer season, and the poor girls whose maidenhood was lost in the last summer, they do not know the whereabouts of those demons of sex, because they did not deem it proper to give these girls their addresses, fearing that they would be involved in trouble if any of the girls conceived. And Frederick J. Hoffman comments about this, that love is not love if it cannot be identified with addresses, with the circumstances of home, the responsibilities of a human continuity. It is only an incident, something quickly indulged in and forgotten, a source of boredom. So now Tiresias now recalls another such scene of debauchery at Lake Leman. By the waters of Leman I sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long, but at my back in a cold blast I hear the rattle of the bones and chuckle spread from ear to ear. So this Lake Leman is a pleasure resort for the rich, where Tiresias, he is in tears on the fate of the poor girls who sold themselves to the libidinous, fashionable gentlemen. In his mind arises images of the horror of death, with chuckles of itself over its deed. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank, while I was fishing in the dull canal on a winter evening round behind the gas house, musing upon the king, my brother's wreck, and on the king, my father's death before him, white bodies naked on the low damp ground, and bones cast in a little low dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only, ear to ear. So Tiresias is seen fishing in the dull canal. That is, he is thinking about regeneration, fertility, revival of fertility in the modern wasteland, and he is thinking about the myth of the Fisher King. He identifies himself to the quester who went to Chapel Perilous after the Holy Grail and who restored back fertility to the parched wasteland of the Fisher King. So he identifies himself with the Fisher King. He identifies himself with Prince Ferdinand of the Tempest, where Ferdinand imagines the his father, King Alonso of Naples, who is dead, and he listens to the song of Ariel, who sings about the transformation of his father's body parts into something precious, something better. But this kind of a regeneration, this kind of a revival to fertility is not possible for the modern wastelanders, because there is a presence of a rat that is a pest and who is enemy to vegetation, to fertility. And that's why he sees that there are scenes of immoral sexual perversions rampant in the modern wasteland, and as yet there is little hope for the wastelanders to revive back fertility, to get themselves regenerated. And he says, but at my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. So in the midst of the rattling sound produced by the running of a rat among bones, Tiresias hears the sound of horns and motors, which bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter. And Sweeney is a prototype of the loitering heirs of city directors we just saw in the previous lines. In the different versions of the ballad, from where Eliot has borrowed Mrs. Porter and her daughter. She is portrayed as a procuress. The moon shines bright on Mrs. Porter and on her daughter. They wash their feet in soda water. When Tiresias sees Mrs. Porter and her daughter washing their feet in soda water, he is reminded of these lines from Paul Verlaine's Parsifal, which is in French. And this line that is in French, its English version is, "Oh, these children's voices singing in the dome." So this line refers to the scene when Sir Parsifal has reached the Chapel Perilous, and it refers to the choir of children singing at the foot washing ceremony which precedes the success of Parsifal's quest and the lifting of the curse from the Fisher King and his country. So, but looking at Mrs. Porter and her daughter washing their feet, he is stunned at the parody of this pious ritual. He anticipates that Sweeney will rape Mrs. Porter's daughter, and Mrs. Porter will be happy because, after all, she is a procuress. He feels that Mrs. Porter's daughter is crying like Philomel, twit, 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 jug, 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 and Sweeney is chasing her. So Tereus, that is Tereus, modern Tereuses are still pursuing innocent Philomels, and the Philomels, they are still unable to set free themselves from the clutches of these Tereuses. Yet again, Tiresias gives us another portrait of a sexual pervert, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant with all the paraphernalia of the business class. Unreal city, under the brown fog of a winter noon, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant, unshaven with a pocket full of currants, CIF, London, documents at sight, asked me in demotic French to lunch on at the Cannon Street Hotel, followed by a weekend at the Metropole. So for the Smyrna merchant, for him, sex is only a commodity which he purchases whenever he feels like. This time he invites Tiresias to lunch at the Cannon Street Hotel, followed by a weekend at the Metropole, a luxury hotel at Brighton. Southern notes that a weekend at Brighton is understood colloquially as an invitation carrying sexual implications. In the legends of the Grail, there is a reference to the Syrian merchants carrying fertility cults to Europe. People said that these merchants considered their commerce and religion as their two eyes. Here, Mr. Eugenides being one-eyed means that his eye of religion is blind. He has only one eye, and that eye is that of commerce. At the violet hour, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi throbbing, waiting, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breasts, can see at the violet hour, the evening hour that strives homeward and brings the sailor home from sea, the typist home at tea time, clears her breakfast, lights her stove, and lays out food in tins. Out of the window, perilously spread, her drying combinations, touched by the sun's last rays. On the divan are piled, at night her bed, stockings, slippers, camisoles and stays. I, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dugs, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I too awaited the expected guest. So now another scene. Here we are shown a new drama of automatic lust. A lower middle class typist girl, she comes back home in the evening and sets her room to receive the young man Carbuncular. Tiresias, the blind prophet, he perceives the scene and he also waits for the expected guest. So the sense of futility, frustration and boredom that is implicit in love and sex in the wasteland is skillfully exposed in this scene also of the typist girl by Eliot. So he, the young man carbuncular, arrives, a small house agent's clerk with one bold stare, one of the law on whom assurance sits as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire. The time is now propitious, it is appropriate, as he guesses. The meal is ended, she is bored and tired, and he comes and she guesses that she is bored and tired now, and he endeavors to engage her in caresses, which still are unreproved, unresponded, if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. He performs sex. Exploring hands encounter no defense. She is indifferent to whatever happens to her. So there is no sensitivity, there is no reciprocity. His vanity requires no response and makes a welcome of indifference. And I, Tiresias, have forsuffered all, enacted on this same divan or bed, I who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked among the lowest of the dead. So he has seen, Tiresias has seen, say, snakes copulating, and this scene that he sees is also like animal copulation. There is no emotional bonding between the two performers, and he bestows one final patronizing kiss. It is not a lover's farewell kiss, rather it is as if he has shown kindness towards her in removing her boredom, in whiling away her time, and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit, and as there is no light in the staircase, he gropes his way, he tries to find out his way. Also, it is groping the way through their lives, because it's a world of ignorance that they are living in. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of a departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I am glad it's over. So she has her own way of overcoming the boredom of life, the typist girl. Though she does not derive any pleasure in sexual drama she has participated in, the departure of a lover does not matter to her. In her brain passes one half-formed thought, well, now that's done, and I am glad it's over. However, it is only the rationalization of what she has actively done. She is fully aware of the injury she has inflicted upon her conscience. With a heart burning with a feeling of self-condemnation, she paces about her room again, alone. She smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. So she tries to drive away the terror of loneliness by putting a record on the gramophone. Tiresias here compares her with Oliver Goldsmith's Olivia in The Vicar of the Wakefield, who returns to the place of her seduction and sings a song, which means that if a woman is sexually preyed upon by a man due to her own foolishness, nothing can soothe her melancholy, and no art can wash her guilt away, and the only way to save her name from ignominy is to die. But the typist girl will never make this choice. She will die every moment spiritually, yet will recover from her spiritual death physically. So this music crept by me upon the waters and along the Strand, up Queen Victoria Street, O city, city, I can sometimes hear beside a public bar in Lower Thames Street the pleasant whining of a mandolin, and a clatter and a chatter from within, where fishmen lounge at noon, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendor of Ionian white and gold. So Tiresias is walking along the Strand, up Queen Victoria Street. The voice of the music of a gramophone is still creeping by him upon the waters of the Thames. He walks along and finds himself somewhere near a public bar in Lower Thames Street, where fishermen lounge at noon. He has sometimes heard sweet whining musical notes of a mandolin, mixed with the sound of clatter and chatter of the fishmen in the bar. The city church of St. Magnus Martyr is standing there majestically. In this part of the city that is far from the debauchery of the cultured and civilized fashionable society, there are still alive traditions of community life among the fishermen who live under the benign shadow of the church. There is a harmony of work, religion, and pastime. People here are no longer a collection of natural non-entities. The public bar is no longer a room enclosed. The river sweats, oil and tar, the barges drift with a turning tide, red sails wide to leeward swing on the heavy spar, the barges wash drifting logs down Greenwich Reach or past the Isle of Dogs, Leela lee, Walala leela la. Elizabeth and Leicester beating oars. The stern was formed a gilded shell, red and gold. The brisk swell rippled both shores. Southwest wind carried downstream a peal of bells, white tars. Veela la lee, Walala leela la. Now the scene shifts to the song of the Thames daughters and the Rhine daughters, as depicted by Wagner in his opera Götterdämmerung in Eliot's notes. The scene moves from the typist's apartment to the waterfront and then to the Thames River. The three Thames daughters together sing their song in the first two stanzas, and then each of them sings separately. The theme of their song is a lament on the loss of virginity. So the initial lines, the river sweats, oil and tar, the barges drift with a turning tide, red sails wide to leeward. So the rhythms of these unpunctuated lines, they project the fluidity of the Thames River. In Wagner's Götterdämmerung, the Rhine maidens, the Rhine daughters, they lament the theft of the hidden treasure of gold, because its loss means also the loss of the river's beauty, and they are lamenting it. Whereas the three Thames daughters, in the wasteland, they lament the loss of their virginity, and in consequence the river's loss of purity. So it is filled with oil and tar, the river. It has been contaminated. But the Rhine daughters, who are lamenting the loss of gold, that can be recovered. And whereas the Thames daughters, they are lamenting, they are regretting the loss of their chastity, which is irrevocable. And the second part of the Thames daughters song recreates the romantic scene of the love making between Queen Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. This recreation of the spirit of the Renaissance, along with the barge scene in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, serves as a contrast to the futile love of the typist girl and her sordid lover. However, beneath the elegance and refinement of the love affair of Elizabeth I, the futility and sterility of that relationship is also remembered. The three Thames daughters song, it continues, and the lament also continues. Trams and dusty trees, Highbury bore me, Richmond and Kew undid me. By Richmond I raised my knees, the pine on the floor of a narrow canal. Bored with her life in Highbury, the first Thames daughter, she sought temporary relief in Richmond and Kew, where she surrendered herself to a debauch. The memory of her sexual performance has lacerated her heart so much that she does not hesitate in using vulgar language to describe the scene of her ruin. And the second Thames daughter, she says, my feet are at Moorgate and my heart under my feet. After the event he wept. He promised a new start. I made no comment. What should I resent? The seducer of the second Thames daughter seems to be a man of conscience. She says that after seducing her, he wept and promised a new start, to which she said nothing. What had she then to preserve by showing her resentment against any move of his? The third one, on Margate sands, I can connect nothing with nothing. The broken fingernails of dirty hands, my people, humble people, who expect nothing. The third Thames daughter was seduced on Margate sands. The image of the broken fingernails of dirty hands of a seducer are still frightening her. So this section closes with what is probably an allusion to the words of Lord Buddha, suggesting that the world is burning with fires of passion, hatred, and sexual infatuation. To Carthage then I came, burning, 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 burning. O Lord, thou pluckest me out. O Lord, thou pluckest burning. So this section closes on a note of the promise of redemption from the sin of the flesh through repentance. Such sins have been committed by men in the past as well. After repenting for their sins, they become saints. Saint Augustine is an example, whose words Tiresias quotes. In his youth, Saint Augustine could not restrain his sensual temptations, about which he wrote in his Confessions. To Carthage then I came, where a cauldron of unholy loves sang all about mine ears. Tiresias juxtaposes Buddha's views on human passions with Augustine's. Buddha said in the fire sermon that everything is on fire. All things, O priests, are on fire. The I, O priest, is on fire. Forms are on fire. I consciousness is on fire. Impressions received by the eye are on fire. And whatever sensation, pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent, originates in dependence on impressions received by the eye, that also is on fire. And with what are these on fire? With the fire of passion, say I, with the fire of hatred, with the fire of infatuation, with birth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, grief and despair are they on fire. It's taken from the Teachings of the Compassionate Buddha by E. A. Burt. In his discourses, Buddha recommended withdrawal from everything in man's nature that is on fire as a sure gateway to nirvana. That only after withdrawal from these sensual or these unholy fires that man is burning in, he can open the gateway to nirvana. The last but one line in this section is a part of the following sentence that occurs in Confessions. I entangle my steps with those outward beauties, but thou pluckest me out, O Lord, thou pluckest me out. So Saint Augustine had been far away from God for many years when he was burning in these sensual fires. Yet when he repented of his sins, he felt that God had plucked him out of the fire of unholy passions. In the above words, he perhaps echoes the words of God to Satan above the high priest Joshua, who had been, before becoming follower of the Messiah, a non-believer. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? This section closes on a note of hope. Repentance of the past sins, followed by abstention from the indulgence of senses and inculcation of the spirit of self-abnegation, may spiritually rehabilitate a degenerate soul. This is the message of Saint Augustine and Buddha. However, commitment to belief is the prerequisite to a new start in life. If the wastelanders do not follow these precepts, they will burn in the fire of passions and will one day be enveloped in the deep bottom of the sea of death like Phlebas, the Phoenician sailor.